This is the web series where we turn your projects around. Today, we're meeting with Nate Shalev from New York City. How's it going, Nate?
It's good. It's good. Happy to be here. It's so funny to be like from New York City. I mean, I am based in Brooklyn, and I also grew up here. But it's funny to be like of New York.
You are like I'm not. I'm of Ottawa, which I mean doesn't have the cachet. Certainly is saying you're from New York. So welcome. Really happy you're here. I was wondering maybe if Nate, if you could just provide a bit of an intro for yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Nate Shalev. I am based in Brooklyn. I've got my own consultancy called Revel Impact, where I help create workplaces where both businesses and people thrive. So I focus on leadership development, employee engagement, and all through an inclusion and belonging lens.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really looking forward to chatting more with you. And again, I'll repeat to you folks, jump in at any time. As other people join the call, I will maybe pause briefly just to click a couple buttons to let them in, but otherwise I'm trying to be super focused here. So Nate, we were talking a bit before, and I was suggesting maybe this is a good place to start. Because on LinkedIn today, you had this great post about the coffee cup thing and in interviews and how this can be a difficult situation to manage. I wonder if you could walk us through this, because as you said, it kind of has every once in a while it trends again on LinkedIn, like this is a great idea. And I disagree, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been seeing it pop up again in posts. So the coffee cup test is when an interviewer will give a candidate a cup of coffee or a cup of water, a cup of tea, and then based on what they do after, they will have some sort of insight from it. So if the candidate offers to rinse the coffee cup or just goes ahead and washes the cup, that means that they pay attention to detail, that they're a hard worker, that they're humble, and the idea is that they'd be a good candidate. And I've even seen some folks say that they won't hire anyone who doesn't pass this test. And it always frustrates me whenever I see this test because our workplaces aren't reflective of our actual social environments or the workplace. And so we've got this test kind of based on these arbitrary social cues that we're supposed to understand in the moment and know how to act on. And it's just not, it's not the way that so many of us work, but also even specifically thinking about how to judge a candidate and like the quality of a candidate. This is not, it feels just very arbitrary and frustrating.
It's certainly overly simplistic, if nothing else. And if you're rating somebody based on a data point, and that's kind of your tipping point, I guess, for making a decision, it's certainly unfair for a million reasons. But it to me, it kind of speaks to this. You're expecting somebody to walk in fresh and just understand like there's this homogenized culture here, and everybody does the same things, does the things the same way. So are you part of this or not?
Right.
Which totally sets up an us-them space, right? Which is completely unfair and I would say just mean, right? Because like I couldn't walk into a room with all you folks and just know all of a sudden, how am I supposed to act? I can do my best, but I'll probably screw something up, right? Maybe. So how do you feel in terms of setting up a workspace? I mean, we're here to talk about neurodivergence, things like that, but like in terms of setting up a workspace that is far more accepting of different values and different perspectives and different behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about this, like the coffee cup test initially is just removing this idea of like social norms from job performance. And so like thinking about the person who's the most likable, is that relating to some sort of performance reviews? And so really switching that to really focusing on outcomes and having clarity around our expectations for what we want for our roles, and not necessarily having any sort of weight around if somebody is kind of performing in the way that we think they should, and performing in the sense of like a social performance, not job performance.
Right. Well, let's jump into a couple other things here, because there's a lot I think that we can talk about. But I'm curious in terms of kind of level setting, like how would you define inclusion like through a neurodivergent lens? So as we can so we all have a similar definition in terms of, and how that might differ from, say, a DEI theme in terms of hiring and team development.
Yeah, it's all part of it. So when we're thinking about neurodivergence, it's that umbrella term where we're thinking about folks whose brains function differently than like the statistical average brain. And so it includes a bunch of things like autism and ADHD and dyslexia and dyscalculia and sensory processing disorders. It's a whole host of things. And so when we're thinking about neurodivergence, we're thinking about this umbrella term. And when we're thinking about inclusion, the way that I always think about inclusion is just supporting our people, right? And getting us the resources and supports that we need to succeed. We all have different supports and resources. When we're thinking about things like disability, we're thinking about the ways that our systems and our worlds aren't set up for us to succeed, and how can we actually make that happen. When I'm thinking about how it might be different when we're thinking about neurological, right, our brain function differences, some of it is in how we set up our environments. But the other thing that I wanted us to also have a foundation on is around diagnosis. And so when we're thinking about this in particular, many of the diagnostic criteria is geared around the way that it shows up for men. And so if you did not grow up as a boy, then you most likely hadn't been diagnosed early. And so there's a lot of late diagnoses, and then also many folks might not have the diagnosis at all. And so when we're thinking about inclusion, we want to think about how we can encompass all of that. So rather than having somebody to say, I need this accommodation or I need the support, proactively creating the environment. So we're offering the resources and support to everyone. And I think it's not necessarily different than other DEI practices, but I think this idea that folks might not know, or this might be a newer identity or a newer experience that they're navigating the world with, is something just particular to think about.
Right. Palasha, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
I had a question. I know. Sorry, it feels like I'm in school, but still, I don't want to. I was curious on what your thoughts are. I find in the corporate world, they are really not understanding the difference between equality and equity, and outside of just educating, where it's like, the same thing for everybody is not necessarily the solution, right? Different people need different things. And
exactly.
Any thoughts on how to broach that?
Yeah, it is hard, because I think folks want it to be fair, and there's this idea of fairness that everyone has to get the same things, and that's how we get to the outcome. And so I think first is clarifying what our goals are. Do we want to make sure that everyone can contribute meaningfully? If it's like specific job numbers, outcomes, this is our goal, and so we want to reach this goal. And so what does that mean? So I think it can be helpful to norm on that. I had like a specific example that I'm thinking about. This was around trans inclusion, not necessarily neurodiversity, but it was helping a team understand work from home flexibilities. And this also could actually be with neurodivergence as well, that a great accommodation is around flexibility, so we can control our lighting and our sound and all of that. But the norm was that folks weren't allowed to work from home. And so there was a specific request for trans folks to work from home because they were being consistently misgendered at work. And then it became very, very difficult to actually show up and do the work. And so it was working with the executive team to understand why this was an equity thing and not an equality thing, why it meant that working from home actually meant that I'm able to do the work the same way that everyone else is able to do their work. And so focusing on the outcome that like, we just want to be able to do the work and this is what it takes, can be helpful in that mind switch. But really being able to help folks understand what the experiences are and why this actually matters, and why we need these supports, and why these supports are actually different than others, and that it's okay that we've all got different supports and different needs. And it doesn't mean that it's not fair. It just means that it's different, and different can be okay. It can be tough though.
Yeah, and I don't know, Paul, did you have a follow up or anything else? Okay, I think the whole idea of equity and equality, I've actually had a couple of conversations about this recently, where someone asked me, well, why don't the single people in this organization get the same benefits necessarily as the person with family, and why isn't there like a financial incentive to boost somebody's salary because whatever? And I'm trying to have that conversation, and it was not really about the outcome, like you're saying. The goal is to make sure that everybody has the support they need in that case, in terms of dental, something like that. But it's not necessarily to make sure that everybody has to the penny same dollar amount value on these things. So it was an interesting conversation there too. I see working from home similar. I mean, that conversation has changed so much in the last 5 years. dramatically, because all of a sudden everybody had to, and everybody suddenly realized, oh, this isn't such a bad thing necessarily. But sometimes it's just people almost refuse to want to have that conversation, or to shift what they consider to be normal. So like how does one maybe engage with a person or an organization who's really kind of kicking their heels in, saying, well, no, I don't think, like, why should we do this? And then we have to do it for everybody. Like, how is that? How do you get around that argument?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I think about it is that we do have to do it for everybody because everybody is different and unique. And so, meaning like not everyone has the same thing, but I think when we're thinking about how to intentionally create these inclusive environments, it is about offering options, and that does help everyone. So thinking about how like having a gender inclusive bathroom at work helps me as a trans person go to the bathroom, but it's also going to help a father who needs to go with his infant daughter to the bathroom. So it helps everyone. Or even thinking about neurodivergence. When I work with teams, I do a user manual activity, or I encourage direct reports and managers to do a user manual activity. The idea is to essentially creating the user manual for how to work with one another. And that'll include questions like, how do I like to receive feedback? How do I like to get support for project management? Do you want me to check in every week, every day, or only when you ask? And everyone's got different ways for the way that they either like to receive feedback or the way that they like to work. And so everyone's got those different needs. But when we're thinking about neurodivergence, for me, the way that my brain works, I need a structure. I need to understand what's going to happen. Otherwise, I can't focus. So that's part of my autism for me. But somebody else just might like to have an agenda before the meeting. It helps everyone. And so it's just thinking about the ways that we all show up with these different needs and supports, but specifically then how we're thinking about it in terms of disability, in terms of neurodivergence. So it's just norming that it is something that we all need, because we all do have different needs. And so being able to have it built into our process, we're able to offer these different options.
What would be an example, or in your view, like some small change that maybe would be incredibly helpful for yourself even, or anyone else you've worked with, in terms of just shifting things just a little bit to get that conversation started?
Yeah. So one, I think it's also just generally having that shift to say, like, we're being proactive in this. We are thinking about everyone in terms of the different supports that they need. I really like Ellie Middleton, who is on LinkedIn and everywhere, who talks a lot about accommodations, but she's got a framework, what, by, when, and why. And that's a really good way when we're thinking about telling folks, like if you're asking somebody to do a thing, like, what do you need to do? By when do you need it? And why am I doing this? And that it can be a really it's like a simple switch, but it's a mindset switch to be able to make sure that you're being really clear in your instruction, really clear in your expectation, and then also providing that context, which can be really helpful for folks when thinking about kind of on different neurodivergent spectrums.
Right. The issue of clear communication. I mean, across the board, across whatever spectrum you might want to talk about, the clearer the communication, generally, the better things go. I think in my experience, I've worked with enough teams where just things were fuzzy. Some people are comfortable working in the fuzziness.
Yep.
And they can kind of navigate that, and they manage, but some people just can't. And sometimes it just depends on the project too. If it's a new thing, something they've done 100 times, then maybe the fuzziness is okay. So I think just generally a theme of really crystal clear communication is a good one for everybody, which I find generally lacking in a lot of organizations anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even something like, can you get this to me by the end of the day? Like, what does that mean? Does it mean 5 p.m.? Is it your end of the day? If you're on a different time zone, is it my end of the day? Is actually the end of the day 3 p.m. because you need it out? And so making sure, like, even thinking about like what that actually means, and being really specific.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just going to I'm going to welcome Chandra, who I think I met the other day. Hi, Chandra. If anybody else has questions, comments. Hi. Please jump in. I see Mark, you just unmuted. Do you want to jump in for a sec?
Yeah, I just, as I think about it, and how I work with my teams, I figure if you're using empathy at all, you're going to have that consideration. It's, I remember when we started having to go home for COVID, and some of the additional needs people had beyond just, now that they were home, what do I wear? Do I have to be on the camera? Right? I'm not comfortable with you seeing my home. I mean, these are considerations that had nothing to do with anything other than their particular situation, regardless of socioeconomic, cultural, racial, neurodivergence, whatever it is. It's trying to work with your folks the best possible. And part of me wants to say, can we all just want to get along, kind of thing, as opposed to, I'm as liberal as the day is long, which, being from the States and now living in where I live, is sometimes hard to be. But it just makes me wonder, what's that line that we come to and say, it's no longer accommodation for the sake of accommodation for a class. It's accommodation for the sake of the person being respected.
Yeah, I think the best practice is thinking about it in that way, right? That we're trying to offer accommodations because we don't know what everyone's experiences are. And so again, some folks might have different experiences based on a protected class, but some folks, it just might help the way that they show up for work and might help them do their best work. And so I do think generally it's the best practice just to think about this as the best way to do our work, and being able to be proactive in creating these environments when we're thinking about our like expectations around performance reviews or office setup, or really every single aspect of our workplace. I think thinking about it in that way is something that just makes sense for our workplaces overall, regardless of what we do or don't know about somebody's individual experiences, because there's so much also stigma around having to actually make the ask for an accommodation. We don't know. And also even knowing when we're thinking about neurodivergence, right, that there's this phrase, like, you've met, like, if you've met one autistic person, you've only met that one autistic person, because it is a spectrum. So somebody might have a sensitivity to low light, and somebody then might have a sensitivity to fluorescent lights, right? And so we've got these different needs. And so we do have to think about the individual, right? And being able to thinking about this more holistically.
I have a question. I'm wondering how much of this is also tied into, when we talk about expectations and respect, is having faith in people. You know what I mean? That if you support people and give them what they need, like, they will do their best job, right? Where I find sometimes organizations, I don't know, get into this non-human mindset where it's control and, oh, well, if you get extra, then you're just going to slack off, or you're going to whatever. And it's like, no, have faith in the people that you hire, right? That they're going to do the work. And if you support them, they're going to be able to do their best work. And I sometimes wonder, how much of that is also tied into this whole conversation and this reluctance and resistance to sort of make accommodations, even as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can also have accountability for, right, what we want to have happen. So it doesn't mean having accommodations doesn't mean we have any lesser expectations for work outcomes. It's just we're making sure that folks get the resources that they need to actually make those outcomes successfully. And so I think that's also a difference, that thinking that folks might slack off, then that's the problem that we need to address. Like, the working from home isn't the problem. The problem is that you think folks are slacking off or not doing, not working well, not working efficiently, productively, whatever it is. But that's the problem that we need to address.
I've had many conversations about just that subject for 30 years now, probably. But the notion of the whole 9 to 5 at the office, world that so many of us have lived in, and many still do, but really, it came out of the Industrial Revolution, where you're kind of tied to a machine. You're there for 10 hours a day, and that's how you were measured by your output. So the space that I certainly work in now, this used to be my dining room, where I am right now, and I can tell you I'm pretty productive, whether it's between, at these hours or these hours, either everything gets done. So yeah, it really comes down to wanting to control, how things get done, and that is still, I'm surprised, I guess, in a lot of ways that there's still people learning that it's not this one way of doing things, that we can provide a lot more variety and a lot more options. And really at no cost. Like ultimately, you're buying the computer anyway. You're setting somebody up in an office anyway. Like you might as well get them the light that they prefer, or whatever the situation might be. So I think there's just it surprises me, frankly, that it's still such an issue.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. I mean, it shouldn't be
Yeah.
an issue. And I think it's also knowing that there is value to that. That somebody who needs a different sort of work space environment is going to be the person who might give you, your next bold idea, is going to be the person who's going to fix this problem in your operational logistics system. That it's not prioritizing what the kind of cultural norms or social norms or what we think a workplace should be, not prioritizing that experience over another experience, not thinking that that's actually the better way to be, or that indicates anything about what our performance may be.
Yeah. Back to your expertise, maybe, but like, what are some signs that a workplace that they're maybe just being perfunctory, saying, yes, we provide whatever you need. Like, how do you actually recognize, or what's some early signs of recognizing that maybe this is going to be more of a challenge than maybe anticipated?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts from the interview process, or probably even in the job description, right? I think if you have some words like fast-paced working environment, right, like things like that, you can probably start to indicate that it might not be as accommodating. But even like in an interview process, if they provide the questions beforehand, if they give you options for how to have the interview by phone or by video or in the office, being able to have those different options, I think are early indicators of what and then even in the expectations, this is what's going to happen in the interview process. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. It'll take X amount of time, and then they actually follow through on that. I think are all good indicators of a workplace actually being inclusive. And then I think like things like agendas, things like captions, right? Those things where you're able to see that there are things behind the words, that there are actions being taken. And then I really think this proactive stance around offering these different accommodations to start with, so you actually can have where you actually know that it's embedded into each part of the culture, that it's just something that is a norm for how we work here.
To pivot a little bit to more about your background too, because I know you're a content creator, very active on LinkedIn, etc., but you're also a storyteller. Can you tell us a bit about your background there and how that kind of fits into to what you work, your current work?
Yeah, I think storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that we have in terms of relaying some of these experiences, because I only know my unique experience. And so being able to share that, I think helps folks make it real, helps people understand what it actually means. So I can say something like, an airport, right, is something that everyone knows is stressful often. We've got to get to the airport, we got to make our flight. But when I actually share what the experience is as an autistic person navigating the airport, that it can actually cause my nervous system to shut down, and what that actually means in terms of the different beeping that's happening, and the loud noises, and the baby crying, and then the long lines that are often really hard to navigate, and being able to go through what each of those things, what the indicators are, and then how they affect me personally, and having to tell this in a story in a way that people are able to receive can be really powerful. And so I think it helps to build empathy. I think it really helps to make these experiences real, because again, we only know our individual stories and our individual experiences. And so the way that we're able to broaden that and have a more expansive view of the world is by sharing these stories.
How did you decide to kind of work that? We'll put all these skills together. I mean, how did you manage to navigate that? I'm just curious how this really evolved for you.
Yeah, it's funny because I trace it back to I got into spoken word poetry in high school. There was like a very big heyday of spoken word, right? I mean, that's why I'm like always like, it's like a little funny, but it is what it is. But that was one of the first, right? New York City, at least, right? Big spoken word community here. And so I was able to understand the power in that, the power of actually being able to tell a story in an intentional way, and knowing that the way that we say something has an impact on how people could hear it. And so seeing the power in that, for me personally, being able to understand my friends' experiences differently, seeing new sides, right? New York is full of different communities and different experiences. And so understanding that from a very early age, and knowing the power in that there's an actual that the energy can shift in a room, that it can actually move people to action, was something really powerful to me. And so once I started to post on LinkedIn and it started to resonate, and then I would get these, inbound messages, or when I would speak to teams, that I would know that it was actually having an impact. So it could be even just saying like, your story resonated with my own, and now I feel just better about who I am as a human in the world because I know I'm not alone. Or if it said your suggestion to do X thing actually made me request X thing in my office, and now we're making this change. And so knowing that it can have this direct impact can be really powerful. And it's like, it can feel like just a LinkedIn post or just an email or whatever it is, but knowing that it can have this reach and can actually move people to making real change is something that has felt really encouraging, especially now.
It's amazing, and I'm pretty active on the LinkedIn universe myself, and I know a lot of people are posting lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff, and what's AI generated, and and I'll admit to have done that myself, but you can identify very clearly what's 100% AI and what's just a really generalized kind of advice or just thoughts on things, or really awkward tie-ins, like I went out on a date last night and now I'm going to tell you about SaaS marketing. Like this just doesn't, all these things people try to connect together. But your approach, I find anyway, is so genuine and just so and inspiring too. But you can tell it's really you. And I think that's why I wanted to connect with you originally. It was just because, okay, you're somebody who's genuinely trying to make a difference, doing really good things. It's somebody I should talk to. But I'll spend 5 minutes complimenting you. But I think it's great that you do that, and that you're brave enough to do that. Because I know a lot of people who aren't, and will feel like maybe I'm not going to really put myself out there because this is LinkedIn, and it's got to be professional, that right. But you're kind of redefining what that means. And I think maybe it's a generational thing too. I don't know. I'm guessing I'm about 25 years older than you, but I think there's a newer, younger professionals now are more willing and able to really just be themselves in a public space, which I think was scary probably for folks of other generations. I'm overgeneralizing, but I just get this trend anyway that this is where you and other folks who are brave like you are just really making a big difference. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It is very kind. And I think, we're thinking about LinkedIn, we're people outside of work, we're people at work. And so being able to just bring that in and not having those clear distinctions, I think can be really helpful. And I would also say, when thinking about sharing something that's personal doesn't always have to be vulnerable. And I think that that's also an important distinction to make. Anything I share on LinkedIn, I've worked through, I understand, there's not, it doesn't feel vulnerable because I'm not concerned about what the outcome might, meaning I'm not concerned about how people are going to react. I'm sharing it because it feels like there is a point to it. It feels like I'm sharing because I either feel like there's something missing from the conversation, like the coffee cup test. I'm seeing, it feels like there's something missing from the conversation. I feel like there's something unique that I can add. And so that's why I'm posting. And even though it's often rooted in a personal story, because I think it helps build empathy and helps to make it real for folks, it's not something that I necessarily feel is a vulnerable share. It's not raw. I'm not working through it in a public platform. I've already worked through it, even when it's if I'm trying to highlight an issue of bias or harassment or something, I've already worked through it. And so I'm posting here so others can learn from it. And I think that can also help some of the concerns that folks often have when they start to post.
I think that's a very interesting distinction, actually, in terms of, it's something you've worked through, you've managed. It's like you put it in the box and it's, it's ready to kind of go live, right? And as opposed to, there's a certain, I think, value in time and place for sharing, very vulnerable, raw, as it's happening kind of experiences. I'm not sure, for me, I'm not going to put that on LinkedIn or Facebook or any other, public platform. I'm going to keep that close. But it's really nice, I think, to be able to share that once you have kind of figured out a lot of what that really means, and then post that for others to relate to and respond to. Very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right, there's something like 1 billion accounts on LinkedIn. And so people, we don't know what the response is going to be. And as much as we want people to be kind, people are also often not kind. And so being able to be okay with whatever response is going to happen is also important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's an actually interesting question, because there is so much hate just in general, I mean, in the world, but on the internet, it seems to be, focused. How do you prepare yourself, and how do you manage when those things pop up? I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm sure it has. Like, how do you just cast it aside? Do you try to engage, or like, how do you manage when something like that pops up?
Yeah, I really want my platform to be a learning platform where folks can ask questions they're afraid to ask elsewhere. And so if I feel like somebody is genuinely coming from a curiosity standpoint, they are genuinely asking a question, even if the question, when I read it, feels like off, or I'm not really sure what's going on. If it feels like it's a point of education and wanting to know, then I'll usually answer it. If it feels like somebody is they don't actually want the answer, they are like writing it to tear you down, then I'm very quick to block and delete, and I don't engage at all. So it's not very clear cut. It's often just what I feel, and then I'll give somebody a chance, and then if they do not, then I block and delete them. LinkedIn is interesting because there is some level of people being aware that their employers and their future employers are on the platform, less so than you would think. Like, you think people would be much more aware of it, but it's often right. You can screenshot and send to somebody's employer. Like, that's always an option. And so for me, that feels just like a nice thing to fall back on if that needs to happen. But then the other thing is, again, just like I can only feel good about the content that I put out. I can know that I tried to say as clear and as truthful as I could. And if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate. That's okay. But for me, I try to just make it as clear as I can. If it feels important, I'm going to post it. And also just knowing that the algorithm is, who knows what it is, right? This mystical algorithm. And so I try not to think about it too much, knowing that also just might be part of it. And that, LinkedIn prioritizes different content based on different things that LinkedIn is prioritizing that also have nothing to do with me.
Yeah, that's true. So much of it is out of our control. So it's very hard to maintain that space anyway. Brief pause. Comments, questions from the gathered masses. Just curious if anybody wants to jump in with a thought. Want to make sure you have the opportunity to do so. Brief pause. Nothing right now. That's fine. My next question for you, Nate. I mean, apologies, is a question you've maybe heard a million times, and I know I've asked a million times, but like, that new leader, you're either just entering a new organization, you're a new hire, or you've been, promoted from within, whatever the situation. But now you're in, I guess, a formalized leadership position, because I know you can lead through influence, and there's lots of nuanced ways to do that. But when you're actually given the title and you're on that new special place on the org chart, what is some advice that you might give someone? They obviously they want to be inclusive, but they may have blind spots. What is a good way for them to approach that new role and to help make sure they're creating a good environment for their team?
Yeah, I would say as many processes and structures as you can put in place so you're not making assumptions, it can be really helpful. So I mentioned the user manual activity. I think that's a really good one. Any sort of version of that where you immediately have a conversation where you're explicitly talking about how your teams work best, so you already know. So when the time comes to give feedback, you already know how to give that feedback, and so that piece is already there. And so I think as much as you can, being able to have these systems in place where you can check those assumptions. So even thinking about an example that I give when I do workshops is if you know somebody on your team is autistic and you are managing this project and somebody comes to you and says the person's not being flexible enough, rather than immediately saying, okay, I need to help my team member be more flexible, it's checking that assumption and saying, wait, what's happening here? Was the timeline unclear? Is there something wrong with the operations here? Is it a workflow issue? Is it a communication thing? Is it a flexibility problem and like an adaptability problem, or is it a structural problem? And so being able to immediately check some assumptions that you might have and having those things in place, even if they're just questions that you ask yourself first, it could also be like a specific checklist that you use. But I think having that mindset in place can be really helpful.
I appreciate that. And my flip, I guess, other side of that question, and it may be the exact same answer, but I just, I'll give it a shot. Someone who's maybe been in the biz a while, they've been managing a particular way and they expect certain things a particular way. But they've all of a sudden dawned on them that maybe they're not as inclusive as they. Is there a way to help that person kind of become and to change how their team operates and how their environment operates too?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any. It's never too late to change, And so I think like one option would be to again start offering these different options for what folks might need, how they might work best, starting to switch to having rather than a one size fits all approach, having that more tailored approach. But then it can really be leaning more on processes. So making sure you've got an agenda before each meeting, making sure you've got different modes of participation when you're hosting a meeting, that you've got, ways to participate that are you're thinking about visual, you're thinking about written, you're thinking about asynchronous communication, being able to have all these different options, but having it be very systematized at first. If it's a new thing, to make sure that you're hitting it.
Yeah. You mentioned asynchronous communication.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that kind of popped up for me in my head because I personally find that incredibly challenging. Just me. I'm now sharing my story, but if you're on Discord or Slack or both, or all of the tools that are out there for different reasons. Thanks for laughing, Nancy. I think there's so much out there, and there's so many tools and ways that a team can communicate. Right. And I mean, my case with my company, we're all virtual. There is no physical space. We're ever really together in the same spot. So it's all Discord, it's visual, the odd, call like this. It's really hard just to figure out the right way to do that in general. So I found that what I've been trying to do over the last several years is not just impose, but try and ask, okay, what is this working for you? And really one-on-one going to each team member, is this going to be good for you or is this not? If not, tell me why. And then we try to accommodate, because sometimes it's just, it's just a preference. Sometimes it's a divergent issue. Sometimes it's something else. But just having those one-on-ones can really just help you understand, regardless of who they are, you understand who they are and be able to have those conversations and accommodate as best you can. So I just find myself because there's just so many things going on at any given time. Sometimes it's just a conversation about how do you just reduce all of the things and make this easier for everybody. Like we were talking about, just clear communication, clear directives, also just creating an environment that's not, all over the place all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And being explicit about it. So this is when we use Discord. This is how we use Discord. This is how we use, Notion or whatever other project management platform. This is when we're using email. And thinking about asynchronous, it's okay to not respond. Here's when, if something is urgent, here's the process for that. And just making sure there's clarity around what to use, when to use, and how to use it.
Okay. Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna. It kind of ties the last couple things you were talking about. Is, you were talking, Kevin. You're talking about coming into a leadership role and into an environment that may not be as open and welcoming. And the answer to that, and also this asynchronous communication, I find myself having had to learn to manage up and reset those expectations. I, you know, I've always been told you're not a typical project manager. You're not, you're not this blah blah blah, kind of thing. You're too nice. I mean, I've literally had people and a previous boss of mine said I was too nice, and I was like, okay, I think we need to reset the expectations. I think we need to, I'm not being nice. Number one, I'm being kind. I've learned the difference.
Important distinction.
Yeah. But two, if you're going to judge me, prejudge me because I don't beat my people, right? Because my predecessor was that way. He would bark out orders, and there was a reason he was let go.
Yeah.
And so I had to have that conversation with my boss and go, you didn't like that approach. and right. And so I'm coming from the opposite direction, whether you want to call it neurodivergent. My wife and I joke around that we are full of acronyms and letters, right? I'm INFJ with CPTSD. She's INFP with ADHD.
Yeah.
Right? Regardless of what the alphabet soup is, I'm going to be who I am. And so I've had to, again, train my managers to work with me that same way. Just like I couldn't expect them to just, I need to work with Mark differently. And sort of to that asynchronous thing, I would say, look, when I send you an email, I'm going to do this in the subject line. If I say action, space, something, I need action now. If I say information, something, it's information. You can throw it away or just leave it in your inbox. And next time you search for something, I'll tell you it's there. So I think it kind of goes, it's that managing up as well as managing down.
I think that's really interesting, Mark, managing up, because there's so many variables in any work relationship, and there's so many power dynamics at play as well, right? So it's very hard to do that. But interesting that you brought that up in terms of, because it's not just about leading a team or being part of a team. It is really being able to maybe take that initiative and say, I need this, or I need to communicate in this way, or this is what I need. Nate, any thoughts there?
No, I think that's right. And I think managing up is key, right? Because it's also a way, if folks are comfortable advocating for their own needs, I think folks can think about it in terms of not having to disclose any sort of disability, that you can just say, like, this is what I need to do to do my best work. And you don't have to say why. You can just say, like, this is what I need. So I think managing up is a great tool generally. And the other piece I think is pushing back and defining that. What do you mean by too nice? What does that actually mean? What are you trying to say? Refocus on the outcome. Are you saying that my team isn't producing enough? Are we not reaching our goals? What goals are we talking about here? And then you can actually understand, is it a management issue? Is it a process issue? Is it a goals issue? Or the goals actually not aligned with what needs to happen? And you can actually diagnose what the problem is. But I think it's important to have that pushback, so you can actually like redefine whatever is being said. If it is a work style thing, or if there is some sort of assumption or bias happening, that you're able to help somebody reframe it. So I think that it's important, and it can also it's important to name that you're both managing up and that we're reframing it and pushing back, because otherwise we can internalize that we're the problem. Oh, you're right, I am too nice. And so now I'm going to try to change something that feels innate to me. I'm going to try to shift it because you're saying this is what I need to be a good boss here. Like, this is what the norms are. And so now I need to fit myself into this norm in order to be successful here. And so I think it is important to name that that's what we're doing, so we can just help align with our own self, right? And what feels innate and right for us. Because we can only last so long performing and masking. We're going to burn out pretty soon and not be able to have any sort of long-term, like a long-term career somewhere when otherwise we could have.
Oh, that's great. And thanks, Nate. I'm going to go one more time, ask if there's any other questions from the room. We've had some good chit chats, so I just want to make sure we have that space. Well, maybe Nate, that might be a good place to wrap it up. We'll wrap a little before the hour, but I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it, and I'll be following you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was so lovely.